Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're talking about my hidden gems of Week 4 of the 2019 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about my hidden gems and players that are not widely owned around the National Football League, but I think in Week 4 have very favorable matchups and could be of service to your lineup. So, as we all know, we're all recovering from the snap that occurred many weeks ago and looking to fill our incomplete fantasy football lineups. Unfortunately, the snap forced many of our fantasy football teams to lose very valuable prospects like Saquon Barkley just recently, and the bye week knocking out the guys out of the backfield of the Jets and the 49ers, Bell, Breida, Mostert, and all of those prospects. In order to make sure that we can go ahead and complete our fantasy lineups and try to build championship teams, we're going to have to use the fantasy realm, and we need to gather fantasy talent. This week, we're going to be going after players that are owned in 55% or less fantasy football leagues. We know where they're scattered around time. We know how much talent they have. They all have extremely favorable matchups. We know our mission, whatever it takes. Hey guys, how's it going? All right, Week 4, hidden gems. So before we begin, listen, I understand the guy to my right, or to my left, is... He looks like a joke, right? But I want to preface, this is not a joke. Andy Dalton, Week 4, is a viable prospect. So before we get into that, I just want to talk about a couple pieces of news in terms of the National Football League and this weekend's fantasy football games. So the Thursday night matchup was yesterday. A couple pieces of information, a couple things I wanted to review. Jordan Howard had the best night of all. Absolutely incredible. I definitely did not see that coming. Had 18 touches, a good amount of yards overall. Got work in the passing game. 3 overall touchdowns. He had a hat trick in terms of touchdowns. Does not really happen very often. He's the first player thus far this season to, I think, have 3 touchdowns. Actually, no. Mark Ingram did it last week, so never mind. I answered my own question. But other than that, Alshon Jeffrey was looking healthy, got some work. Nelson Aguilar, MIA, missing in action, completely written off the game script. Ertz was fine. On the other side of the ball, Aaron Rodgers looked better than he has all season long, producing a fantastic fantasy game, which could have even been better. Down on the goal line, they had 4 opportunities to score late in that second half. Weren't able to convert on that, and they ended the game through an interception. So really, it could have been a ginormous game for Aaron Rodgers, but we're satisfied with the performance that we saw yesterday. Similarly to Carson Wentz, he had a good game against the defense that was good. He exposed that defense. Perhaps the Green Bay Packers defense isn't as good as we've thought, and perhaps playing against Mitchell Trubisky in Week 1, playing against Joe Flacco last week. Who did they play in Week 2? I'm trying to recall. Goodness gracious. Am I really going to forget this? Green Bay. Who did they play in Week 2? They played Minnesota. I don't even have to look it up. They played against Minnesota. Kirk Cousins is a mess. Mitch Trubisky's a mess. And, somewhat Joe Flacco's a mess. So maybe, just maybe, that defense isn't as good as we thought. They got exposed in the running game. A defense that was leading the league in terms of turnovers and sacks. Couldn't get a single sack last night and couldn't force any turnovers. So overall, good job by the offensive line and Carson Wentz for that team. But on the other side of the ball, Aaron Rodgers played pretty damn well. And so did Devontae Adams, stepped up. Has that toe injury. From what I heard, he had an MRI. It's not too serious. He probably will. I mean, they have a pretty good amount of time until the next time they play. But until then, he's probably going to take it easy. He might be limited in practice in the coming days, next week. But I'm not really too worried about it. In terms of the other production, I mean, Aaron Rodgers did exactly what he told us what he was going to do. He said, I'm going to feed Devontae Adams and I'm going to feed Jimmy Graham. Jimmy Graham should have had 2 touchdowns last night. Unfortunately, he dropped 1. I think he dropped 2, actually. But, hey, you know what? He's a man of his word, and he delivered. Aaron Jones was able to squeak by with a lot of work in the passing game and getting that early touchdown. Otherwise, 1.6 yards per carry, I think, or 1.9. That's how the Eagles work. Those safeties, they come down and they help in run support. And they're the best team against the run thus far this season for a reason. But either way, he was able to squeak out a pretty good day in fantasy. Overall, pretty exciting Thursday night matchup. The first one that really came down to the wire and was pretty fun. So that was exciting. Other than that, pieces of news. Melvin Gordon is back. Justin Jackson is out this week, and so is Mike Williams for the Chargers. That in itself is very tricky. Like Austin Eckler and Keenan Allen are going to be used heavily. Obviously, Travis Benjamin's going to have to do something. Lance Kendrick was signed as a tight end for that team. Who's really going to get the ball? We don't know. Maybe they use their backup running back who nobody knows of, but only time will tell. This is probably the best opportunity that the Dolphins will ever have in terms of winning a game for a while. So we'll see how this works. Okay, now that we've established all of that, let's get into hidden gems because I know that's what you guys are here for. Let's talk about Andy Dalton this coming week for week 4 of the fantasy football season. He is my mind stone. He's only owned in 33% of Yahoo fantasy leagues thus far this season. I call Andy Dalton Mr. September because in the month of September, Andy Dalton has played better in his career just recently. If you go back to 2018 and what he was able to accomplish in September, the dude had 11 passing touchdowns last season in just the month of September. Had some pretty good performances. Thus far this season, he has struggled with the absence of A.J. Green, but he has still looked consistent in the idea that he has scored 2 touchdowns every single game thus far. Goes into an extremely favorable matchup this coming Monday night against the Pittsburgh Steelers, a divisional matchup against the AFC North, mid-tier teams there. So as of right now, going against the defense, he gives up the 8th most points to opposing quarterbacks, gives up the 6th most points against opposing wide receivers, and the 4th most points against opposing running backs. The Bengals have a pretty good schedule this week. They should be able to take out and put up a lot of points on this opposing Steelers defense that really, as of late, has not looked good. This entire Steelers team, obviously the loss of Ben Roethlisberger, the loss of Antonio Brown makes a difference for this offense, but defensively, even with their additions of Minkah Fitzpatrick, they haven't looked up to par. Sure, they forced a lot of turnovers last week, but that was human error by Garoppolo, by that entire offense, the fumbles, the interceptions. That's not a reoccurring thing that I expect to see this coming week. Sure, Dalton has been turning over the ball, but it's not going to kill his fantasy value. Also, another stat that I wanted to mention for Dalton, the Bengals have only ran the ball 29% of the time this season. Yes, it's absolutely ridiculous. I think on the total 181 plays in which they've at least ran the ball or got off a pass, they've only ran the ball 52 times. An incredibly low amount considering you have the talent of Joe Mixon back there. But because of game script purposes, because of the fact that their defense is not helping them stay in games, they're forced to pass the ball. This coming week, I mean, it's an extremely favorable matchup. John Ross, why am I forgetting? Tyler Boyd and the new guy Tate. Tate was actually pretty good last week. But overall, I think this offense is set to have a pretty good week. As non-serious, Andy Dalton looks to the left of me, I'm completely serious about him. Yes, it's a little tricky, and you may be thinking, well, Andrew, really, Andy Dalton? Look, if any of the available players that I mentioned in my top 16 are not there, and you're interested in going for an Andy Dalton, go for it. But if those top 16 are still available, I would say go with them prior to going with an Andy Dalton. Anyway, here's the gauntlet. Let's go ahead and move on to my next fantasy gem here, the hidden gem, the Power Stone. This coming week, we have ourselves here Paul Richardson of the Washington Redskins. This is my logic behind Paul Richardson. He's only owned in 14% of leagues. Thus far, this week, we have seen Terry McLaurin deal with a hamstring injury that has kind of kept him limited. He's going to play this weekend. I'm of the confidence that Terry McLaurin is going to play. But due to the matchup itself, I mean, the Redskins and the Giants is going to be a shootout. Both defenses are giving up so many points to opposing quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, etc. because of the fact they can't stop anybody. And I really do believe a guy like Paul Richardson, who was used heavily last week against the Bears, had 9 targets, 8 receptions, 83 yards, and a touchdown. In each of the last 2 games, he's had over 85% of the snap share in terms of playing offensive snaps. Paul Richardson's a guy that, coming from Seattle, really wasn't used a lot last season. Had that injury that pretty much held him out for a substantial amount of time last season with the Washington Redskins. But this year, he's come back and looked the part. He really hasn't been given too much opportunity, but this week, I think, if anything, Paul Richardson is absolutely available. Again, only owned in 14% of Yahoo fantasy leagues thus far, probably similar across the entire landscape of fantasy. I think this is a guy that you can plug in, especially if you're dealing with injuries at the wide receiver position or flex position, that can give you a pretty good boost in terms of fantasy points. Of all the names that I'm going to mention today, I think he is the most realistic guy that I would think of grabbing and potentially starting immediately this week because of the matchup against the Giants. We saw exactly what Mike Evans was able to do to Janoris Jenkins last week. I'm not saying Paul Richardson is anywhere close to Mike Evans, but I do believe Paul Richardson will be able to force the issue and have a pretty good game here against the Giants, and that is why he's my power stone. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my next hidden gem for week 4 of the fantasy football season. We have Courtland Sutton as the reality stone, and the reality of the situation, ladies and gentlemen, mainly has to surround around the Jacksonville Jaguars defense. Now, let me explain. Thus far this week, after that amazing Thursday night performance that the Jacksonville defense had against the Titans last week in week 3, we've heard all this noise about Jalen Ramsey wanting to be traded and wanting out of Jacksonville. So what have we heard from that entire situation? Well, I'll tell you. Earlier on in the week, we started off with, I'm sick, I got to miss practice. All right, he missed practice. All right, my back hurts and my hamstring hurts. I got to miss practice. So he missed practice. My girlfriend's having my child. I got to go. I got to fly out to Tennessee because the birth of my child. Misses practice again. The way that I am seeing how this is kind of trending is that Jalen Ramsey's not going to play this week. If, in fact, the birth of his child does occur this weekend, good for him. Congratulations. He needs to be with his family, and that's exactly where he belongs. Not on the field with the Jacksonville Jaguars, especially considering he wants to trade. If he wants to trade, now is the best time to get it, right? And as of right now, staying away from the team is probably the best way in order to kind of force their hand into dealing him away. Obviously, they want a lot. They definitely want at least 1 first-round pick. If they can get 2, I think there's definitely teams out there that are looking for a top cornerback that are trying to make that playoff Super Bowl push. And I think the fact that Jalen Ramsey could be missing the game against the against the Broncos this week in Denver gives Courtland Sutton and Emmanuel Sanders a boost. But specifically Courtland Sutton, because he is the number 1 outside receiver, and he would probably be faced with Ramsey for a majority of the game if in fact he was playing. So if in fact, and Courtland Sutton is owned in 52% of fantasy leagues, which in my opinion is extremely low considering his target counts. He's seen 7, 7, and 8 each of the last 3 weeks. Has had pretty good, yard totals as a whole. I mean, it's pretty good in my opinion, considering Courtland Sutton last season wasn't fantastic, and we didn't really expect much considering Joe Flacco leading this offense, but they have looked good as a whole. I think this week there is a good opportunity for Courtland Sutton to step up and be a part of this offense and really have an opportunity without their top corner in Jacksonville kind of tailing him or shadowing him. And that is why he is the reality zone, because the reality situation is Ramsey's probably out. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my next hidden gem for this week. We have the time stone. Here's the thing. The Kansas City Chiefs, each of the last 3 weeks, have had a hidden gem. It started off with Mecole Hardman, who's gone off great. And then it went to Darwin Thompson last week, which, Darrel Williams over here took his job swiftly without anybody really sensing it coming. So last week, we had all the injury noise about Damian Williams missing the week and potentially LeSean McCoy being injured with that ankle. Darrel Williams in pregame warm-ups, as many of you are aware, was taking the first team snaps and eventually got into the game even though he played behind LeSean McCoy. LeSean McCoy left the game early. Darrel Williams had over 100 scrimmage yards last week and looked pretty good in this offense. And Andy Reid, even after the game, was pretty excited about his potential and how well he performed against the Baltimore Ravens in Week 3. Going into this matchup, LeSean McCoy has practiced this week. He is going to be ready and going. But I do believe that this backfield is going to be a little bit more dynamic. I think they're going to use multiple running backs, and I think Darrel Williams has an opportunity this week to actually contribute in this game. Let me put this in perspective. Against the Detroit Lions, there is a definite possibility that Patrick Mahomes comes out and puts a 35 bomb on them in the first half. That is always possible when Patrick Mahomes is under center and he's on the opposing team from you. If that is to take place, I believe LeSean McCoy's usage is going to go down a little bit. Darrel Williams is going to probably split 50-50 with him in order to make sure that LeSean McCoy is healthy, because this team is going for the Super Bowl. They don't want to force an injury onto McCoy right now that is going to hold him out for a substantial amount of time. They want sustainability. They don't want to just, they're not really worried about, we have to make sure that we win this game wholeheartedly, otherwise we're not winning the season. No. They want to make sure that they can keep LaShawn McCoy sustainable. Therefore, they're going to use Darrel Williams, and it's only a matter of time until Williams gets in the game and really just takes over, because he looked really good last week against the defense that is very good against the run. Even with the absence of their left tackle, Eric Fisher, for the Kansas City Chiefs, this run game did not miss a beat. Their passing game did not miss a beat. Darrel Williams is a dynamic back, can be used on the ground, through the air, and looked overall fantastic last week. And that's why I wanted to mention him. I think if, in fact, you are looking for a flex play, Darrel Williams, because he is associated with this offense, because of the opportunity that he is being given, and the potential, because of the fact that Damian Williams is missing another week, a guy like Darrel Williams can win the job and force Damian Williams down the totem pole and the pecking order, and he can really lift himself up going forward on a game like this against the Detroit Lions, who have not been fantastic against the opposing running back position. And that's why I wanted to bring up Darrel Williams. All right, let's go ahead and move on. Let's talk about my Space Stone for this week. Cole Beasley, baby. Whew. All right, guys. I mentioned Cole Beasley during the waiver wire pickup segment because of the fact that, he got a lot of usage last week. And quite frankly, has seen a lot of targets thus far, this season. He's only owned in 11% of Yahoo leagues thus far, and that's probably the right thing. But for those of you who are desperate at the wide receiver position and none of the other options that I have mentioned are available, I think Cole Beasley has a very good opportunity going forward to, especially this week, be a contributor. Now, let me explain to you why. They play against the New England Patriots at home this week, and the New England Patriots are absolutely going to put Stephon Gilmore, one of the, if not the best cornerback in the National Football League, on top of John Brown. John Brown is the number one receiver of this team. And if, in fact, Stephon Gilmore or any sort of safety help over the top is going to double team John Brown, he's going to be eliminated from the game. And what is that going to force? That is going to force Josh Allen to find other pieces within this offense to have to win the game. And if you force Josh Allen to his other picks, and it's John Brown, obviously, is his comfort right now. But Cole Beasley has been extremely effective and has seen a lot of targets as of late. Just going back the last couple of weeks, he, comparatively to Zay Jones, who has pretty much had the same amount of snap counts as him thus far this season, he has been out-targeted he out-targets Zay Jones 24-10 thus far this season, and Cole Beasley has been pretty good, putting up some pretty good performances, finding the end zone. Let me go ahead and pull these up. Let's check out my boy Cole Beasley really quickly, because I want to go ahead and give you guys some. Oh, he didn't find the end zone. What am I talking about? That's what I thought. That's why I wanted to make sure. He found a 2-point conversion. That's what it was. That's what I remember. In week 1 against the Jets, 9 targets, 5 receptions, 40 yards. Sure, it's not great yardage counts, but in a PPR league, those 5 receptions are pretty good value. In the next week against the Giants, 4 for 4, 83 yards. Again, that's pretty good value. Moving on, this last week against Cincinnati, 10 targets, 8 receptions, 48 yards, and a 2-point conversion. I think Cole Beasley this week might be the target in which Josh Allen is 100% focusing on, because of the fact that John Brown's going to be eliminated. If Devin Singletary is not fully healthy, it's not going to be extremely difficult for this front seven of Bill Belichick's defense to stop Frank Gore. I do not believe that's going to be a difficult task, and there might be a one-sided affair, and it might force Josh Allen to have to throw the ball very often and find Cole Beasley, which isn't out of the realm of possibility. If we go back to week 1, in the slot position, Ryan Switzer, 6 for 6 catching. Yes, his yards total was similarly low to a Cole Beasley average day, but I do think a slot receiver against this defense can be pretty effective, and that's why I have Cole Beasley as my Space Stone for this week. Let's move on to the last hidden gem for week 4 of the 2019 fantasy football season. We have KeeSean Johnson, the rookie sensation from this offseason that we heard so much news about coming out of Cardinals camp, is only owned in 2% of Yahoo fantasy leagues thus far. But why is he my sole stone of the week? Okay, Demir Byard, the number 3 wide receiver for the Arizona Cardinals, will not be playing this week. So why is that of value? Well, if we go back and we look at what kind of snap counts Byard has seen, Byard has played nearly 90% of offensive snaps every single week thus far this season. The Cardinals use the most 3-wide set than just about anybody. I think they're almost tied with, if not more, than the Rams. Those two teams love to use 3 wide receiver sets. And now that Byard is out, KeeSean Johnson, as the number 4 wide receiver, steps up into that position. And I do think against the Seahawks, it is a favorable matchup. And I do think that because of all that we've seen with KeeSean Johnson and Kyler Murray, the combination between the two, him somewhat being a safety blanket for him at times, we could see some production out of him this week against the Seahawks matchup. We know that the Arizona Cardinals love to throw the ball a lot. They love to sit in shotgun formations. They love to sit in 3 or 4 plus wide receiver sets, and they love to throw the ball. And a guy like KeeSean Johnson this week, who might not be pulling a lot of attention from the Seahawks defense, while Christian Kirk and Larry Fitzgerald and David Johnson are pulling a lot of their noise, KeeSean Johnson can sneak by and have a pretty good sneaky week. The Soul Stone is sacrificing Byard and bringing KeeSean Johnson to the light. And that's my last hidden gem for this week. I want to thank everybody for watching. I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your days and spending it with me, watching these videos. I really do appreciate it, guys. Thank you so much. If you haven't yet already, click today's like button. Click the subscribe button if you haven't yet already. Join the community. Next time I will see you guys will be Sunday morning, 8:30 a.m. Pacific Standard Time to watch or to, answer questions regarding Week 4 of the 2019 fantasy football season. If you guys got questions, go ahead and show up. I've found a way to slow down the chat so I can get to everyone's questions in a pretty mannerly time. So thank you again for watching today, and I will see you guys. Peace.